The first crack of the gunshot was a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence Cedar Falls had been dreading for months. It split the humid morning air, sending a flock of crows scattering from the roof of the general store like a burst of black buckshot. Inside the First Territorial Bank, the sentence was being written in gunpowder and fear. Jack Thorne felt the tremor of the blast through the anvil he was shaping. He stilled his hammer mid-swing head, cocked his body a study in coiled stillness. Years of instinct, buried but not dead, screamed a warning. Another shot followed closer this time, sharp and authoritative. It wasn't a stray round from a drunk cowboy. It was the cold, deliberate language of a raid. He dropped the hammer, its clang echoing the gunshots. Dusting the soot from his leather apron, he moved to the wide-open doors of his blacksmith shop. The main street, usually a lazy river of wagons and pedestrians, was frozen in a tableau of panic. A woman had dropped her basket of laundry white sheets, spilling into the ochre dust. Old man Hemlock, the store owner, was frantically trying to pull his shutters closed. And then he saw them. 4 riders, their horses stamping nervously in front of the bank. They wore long dusters, their faces obscured by bandanas. But it was the man who stood on the bank's porch who held Jack's gaze. He was tall and lean, dressed not in a dusty coat, but in a tailored black frock coat incongruously elegant for the filth of his trade. He held a silver-plated Colt with a casual grace that was more menacing than any brute force. Even from a distance, Jack could feel the man's aura of command. This was Silas Crane. The name was a whisper of dread that had been creeping across the territory for 6 months, a phantom of burned ranches and emptied stagecoaches. Now the phantom had come to Cedar Falls. Suddenly the bank doors flew open, and Sheriff Ben Miller was shoved out onto the porch. Ben was a good man, more inclined to settle disputes with a firm word than a fast draw, a friend who had shared countless quiet evenings with Jack over checkers and whiskey. His face was bloodied, but his eyes were defiant. "You won't get away with this, Crane." He spat, his voice raw. Silas Crane smiled, a flash of white teeth in the shadow of his hat brim. It was a performer's smile, meant for an audience. "Sheriff," he said, his voice carrying with a strange theatrical clarity. "You misunderstand. I already have." He raised his Colt. The movement was fluid, almost lazy. Jack's body screamed to move to draw the gun he no longer wore, to do something. But he was 50 yards away, armed with nothing but the ghost of a past that he had tried to bury. He was a blacksmith, not a marshal. Not anymore. The shot was deafening. Ben Miller crumpled to the wooden planks of the porch, a red flower blooming on the star pinned to his chest. A collective gasp rose from the hidden onlookers. The world seemed to shrink for Jack, the sounds of the street fading into a dull roar in his ears. He saw Ben's wife Mary collapse in the doorway of the bakery across the street, her scream a silent knife in the air. Crane's men emerged from the bank carrying heavy canvas bags. Crane himself, however, bent down and calmly unpinned the bloody sheriff's star, tossing it into the dust. He then re-entered the bank for a moment, before emerging with something small and gold glinting in his hand. He held it up to the light, inspecting it. It was a locket. Jack's blood turned to ice. From the safe. He knew exactly which one. His safe deposit box. His locket. Elena's locket. Silas Crane seemed to sense his stare. His head turned and his eyes, cold and intelligent, locked onto Jack's across the dusty expanse. He didn't know who Jack was, couldn't possibly know. Yet he smiled, that chilling, knowing smile again. He snapped the locket open, glanced inside, and then closed it with a decisive click. He slipped it into his waistcoat pocket, a stolen treasure, a violation more profound than any stolen money. With a final sweeping glance at the terrorized town, Silas Crane mounted his horse. "A new era has dawned in Cedar Falls," he declared to the silent street. "Do try to be more accommodating, And with that, he and his men spurred their horses and galloped out of town, leaving behind a dead sheriff, a plundered bank, and a silence thick with grief and fear. Jack Thorne stood frozen in the doorway of his forge, and the smell of coal smoke and death mingling in the air. The quiet life he had built from the ashes of his past had just been burned to the ground. The ghost was no longer a ghost. It had a name, a face, and his most precious memory in its pocket. The life Jack Thorne had sought in Cedar Falls was one of quiet atonement. He had traded the weight of a U.S. Marshal's badge for the solid heft of a blacksmith's hammer, hoping the rhythmic clang of steel on steel could drown out the echoes of the past. His days were measured by the rising and setting of the sun his world contained within the four walls of his forge, and the small Spartan cabin he'd built at the edge of town. The cabin was too quiet, the space beside him, in the narrow bed, a cold, constant reminder of Elena, his late wife, whose laughter had once filled a home that felt a world away from this dusty outpost. Her portrait, a small, delicate painting, sat on his nightstand, her eyes seeming to follow him with a gentle sorrow. The locket had held a miniature of that same portrait, a copy he carried to feel her presence, when the silence grew too loud. He had come to Cedar Falls 2 years ago, a man hollowed out by grief and guilt. The official story was that he had retired after Elena succumbed to mountain fever. The truth was more complicated, a bloody tableau known as the Black Creek Incident. It was a memory he kept locked away, a darkness he never revisited. It was the reason he'd unpinned his own star and vowed never to carry a gun again. He'd seen enough of what men were capable of, and what he himself was capable of, to last a lifetime. Now that buried world had been violently unearthed. In the hours after the robbery, a suffocating pall settled over the town. The body of Sheriff Miller was carried to the doctor's office, his wife Mary's wails a heartbreaking lament that drifted through the streets. People gathered in hushed, fearful clusters, their eyes darting nervously, as if Crane's men were still lingering on the rooftops. Cedar Falls had always been a quiet town, insulated from the territory's worst violence. Now that illusion was shattered. That evening, a delegation came to his forge. The mayor, a portly, sweating man named Abernathy, led the way, flanked by the town council. Behind them, clutching her shawl in the fading light, was Mary Miller. Jack Mayor Abernathy began, his voice strained. We need your help." Jack didn't turn from the forge, where he was heating a piece of iron to a blistering orange. The metal was an outlet for the cold fury that had been simmering inside him all day. "I'm a blacksmith, Mayor. You need a lawman." Ben was. "Our lawman," one of the councilmen said, his voice cracking. "And now he's gone. Evans is a good kid, but he's just a deputy. He's not ready for this. Not for a man like Silas Crane." Jack pulled the glowing iron from the coals and laid it on the anvil. "Then wire the territorial capital. Request a marshal." "We did," Abernathy said, his tone desperate. "They said it could be weeks, a month even. Crane will own this territory by then. He'll bleed us dry. You were a Marshal, Jack. One of the best, from what Ben used to say." Jack brought the hammer down the resulting boom, a deafening punctuation. Sparks flew, illuminating the grim set of his jaw. "I'm retired." The words were flat, final. He had made a promise to Elena on her deathbed, a promise to leave that life behind. More than that, he had made a promise to himself after Black Creek. It was Mary Miller who stepped forward, her face pale and streaked with tears, but her eyes holding a terrifying strength. "He was your friend Jack." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the forge like a razor. "Ben looked up to you. He said you were the most honorable man he ever knew. He said you understood what justice meant." She took a shaky breath. "That man, Crane, he didn't just kill my husband. He laughed while he did it. Are you going to let him get away with that?" Jack stopped, his hammer held aloft. He could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their hope, their fear. He looked at Mary's face, and in her grief, he saw his own. He saw the empty space beside her that would never be filled. He saw the years of loneliness stretching before her. And he saw the glint of gold in a killer's hand and the small oval locket that held the last piece of his own shattered heart. This wasn't just about justice for Ben. It was about reclaiming the one thing Silas Crane had taken that was not the town's, but his alone. He slowly lowered the hammer, the clang of it on the anvil, a sound of surrender. He turned to face them, his gray eyes hard as flint. He looked past the mayor, past the council, and directly at Mary. "I'll need a horse," he said, his voice a low growl, "and a rifle." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the frightened faces. "And someone get that star out of the dust. I'll be needing it." The mayor's shoulders sagged in relief. Deputy Evans, a young man with earnest eyes who had been hovering at the back, stepped forward holding out a gun belt. It was Ben's. Jack took it, the worn leather familiar in his hands. He strapped it on the weight of it, both a burden and a homecoming. He was no longer Jack Thorne, the blacksmith. He was Marshall Thorne once more, a ghost stepping back into the world of the living, or perhaps the world of the dying. His quiet atonement was over. A different kind of reckoning had begun. The trail left by Silas Crane's gang was not that of common outlaws. It was arrogant, a brazen scar carved into the land, as if they dared someone to follow. Jack followed. He rode out at dawn, the newly polished star on his vest, a cold weight against his chest. He rode alone, having rebuffed Deputy Evans' eager offer to join him. This was not a job for a boy still learning how to shave. This was personal. His skills, dormant for 2 years, returned with a grim familiarity. The way he read the tracks, 4 horses, 1 shod with a distinctive nick in the iron, all ridden hard, but not panicked. The way he scanned the horizon, his eyes automatically seeking the high ground, the potential ambush points. He was a predator on the hunt, and the instincts that had made him a legend in the territories were sharpening with every mile. For 3 days, he tracked them across the chalky dust of the plains, the sun a merciless hammer overhead. The landscape was a desolate canvas of cracked earth and skeletal brush, the silence broken only by the wind's mournful sigh and the steady plod of his horse. He ate little and slept less, his mind, a razor-sharp instrument focused on one thing, the locket. In his mind's eye, he saw Crane's casual cruelty, the smile, as he pocketed a piece of Jack's soul. On the 4th day, the trail led him into a labyrinth of red rock canyons, the walls rising like ancient, silent sentinels. The air grew still and close. Jack's senses screamed. The tracks were too clear, too easy. This was a trap. He dismounted, tethering his horse in a cluster of junipers. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard, the cold steel a grim comfort in his hands. Moving with a silence that defied his size, he scaled the canyon wall, finding handholds in the weathered sandstone. From a high ledge, he surveyed the canyon floor below. There, nestled in a box canyon, was a small, smoldering campfire. 2 men lounged by it, their rifles leaning against a rock nearby. It was a lazy, careless camp. Too careless. Jack scanned the canyon rim, and there they were. 2 more men hidden in the rocks above the camp, their rifles trained on the canyon entrance, where he would have ridden in. A classic pincer ambush. Amateurs would have been drawn in by the bait. Jack was no amateur. He settled himself behind a rocky outcrop, and the canyon rim his hunting ground. He was patient, his breathing slow and even. He waited for the sun to dip lower, for the long shadows to stretch and deepen, providing him with the cover he needed. When the moment was right, he acted. He didn't fire. A shot would give away his position to all 4 of them. Instead, he worked his way along the rim, as silent as the circling hawk above. He came up behind the first sniper, a lanky man chewing on a piece of jerky. The man never heard him. Jack's hand clamped over his mouth, his other arm wrapping around his throat in a chokehold that was swift and brutally efficient. The man went limp without a sound. The second sniper was more alert. He must have sensed a change in the silence, the absence of his partner's quiet rustling. He turned, his eyes widening in surprise. Jack didn't give him time to shout. He lunged his rifle butt, striking the man hard on the side of the head. The sniper crumpled unconscious, crumpled, 2 down. The 2 at the campfire were still oblivious, laughing over a shared bottle. Now Jack had the advantage. From his perch he took aim with his rifle. He didn't aim to kill, he needed information. He squeezed the trigger, the shot echoing like a thunderclap in the confined space. The bullet kicked up a cloud of dust, inches from the boot of one of the men. Both men scrambled for their rifles, their laughter replaced by panicked shouts. "Who's there? Show yourself!" "Drop the rifles." Jack's voice boomed down from the rocks, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Or the next one won't miss." They hesitated, their eyes scanning the canyon rim wildly. Jack fired again this time, splintering the stock of one of their rifles. The man yelped and dropped it, as if it were on fire. The other one, seeing the futility, slowly raised his hands. Jack made his way down the treacherous slope, his rifle steady. The conscious outlaw, a man with a scarred face and mean, piggy eyes, glared at him with pure hatred. "Who in the hell are you? The man whose town you robbed." Jack set his voice flat. "Where's Crane?" The outlaw spat on the ground. "Go to hell." Jack's expression didn't change. He calmly walked over to the man's partner, who was still groaning and holding his shattered rifle. Jack pressed the barrel of his own rifle under the man's chin. "I'll ask you one more time. Where is Silas Crane?" The first outlaw's bravado wavered. He saw the cold promise in Jack's eyes. This wasn't some local sheriff playing at being tough. This was something else entirely. "He ain't here," the man blurted out. "He rode on ahead, left us to slow down anyone who might be following." "Where did he ride to?" "Don't know for sure. Said he had business in Jericho. Some silver mine deal." The man's eyes flickered with a strange light. "You're wasting your time, lawman. You have no idea who you're dealing with." He let out a short, harsh laugh. "He's been waiting for you." Jack froze. "What did you say?" "Crane," the man sneered. "He knew someone would come. He said to tell whoever it was that Black Creek sends its regards." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. Black Creek, the name he had buried under 2 years of soot and silence. A name Silas Crane could not know. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a random robbery. It wasn't about money. The raid on Cedar Falls, the murder of Ben Miller, the theft of the locket. It had all been a message. A message delivered across the years of silence and bloodshed. A message meant only for him. The pieces of the puzzle began to slam into place with sickening clarity. The ambush wasn't just to slow him down. It was a test. Crane wasn't just an outlaw. He was a ghost from Jack's past, a past Jack thought he had outrun. The hunt had changed. He wasn't just chasing a thief anymore. He was being lured into a carefully constructed trap, and the bait was his own history. He left the outlaws tied securely for the nearest territorial patrol to find, and rode west toward Jericho, the setting sun bleeding across the horizon, painting the scorched red sand in hues of orange and violet. The vast, empty landscape suddenly felt claustrophobic, as if the ghosts of Black Creek were riding alongside him, their whispers carried on the wind. The trail to Jericho was a journey through Jack's own haunted memory. With every mile, the carefully constructed walls around his past began to crumble. Black Creek, it wasn't just a place. It was the tombstone of his former life. A chaotic firefight in a muddy, rain-soaked gulch. He'd been leading a posse hunting a gang of rustlers led by a charismatic but dangerously unstable man. A man named Marcus Crane. The memory played out in fractured, violent flashes. The smell of wet earth and cordite, the screams of men and horses. He remembered Marcus cornered and desperate, using a young boy as a human shield. Jack had taken the shot. A clean shot he'd told himself 1,000 times. The only shot. The boy was saved, but Marcus Crane lay dead in the mud. The incident had been ruled a justifiable shooting by the Marshal Service, but the victory felt like ash in his mouth. He had seen the look in Marcus's eyes as he died, not of surprise, but of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was a look that had followed him into his nightmares. A few months later, Elena had fallen ill, and in his grief, Jack had used her passing as the final reason to lay down his badge to escape the man he had become at Black Creek. Now it seemed Marcus Crane had a brother who had been nursing a grudge for years, letting it fester into a meticulous, all-consuming plot for revenge. Silas wasn't just an outlaw. He was an architect of ruin, and Jack was his chosen masterpiece. He rode into Jericho under the pale light of a crescent moon. It was a boom town clinging to the side of a mountain, its lifeblood the silver mine that gouged a dark wound in the earth. Unlike the sleepy quiet of Cedar Falls, Jericho was a riot of noise and light, its saloons spilling raucous music and drunken laughter into the streets. It was a place where a man like Silas Crane could easily disappear or build an army. Jack started his search, where all information in a town like this flowed the saloon. He found a place called the Silver Vein, a cavernous, smoke-filled hall teeming with miners, gamblers, and women in gaudy dresses. He bypassed the bar and made his way to the back to a small private office where the town's real power resided. He found it in Sarah Mitchell's saloon in Cedar Falls. Sarah was a woman who had seen the worst of the West and had not only survived, but thrived. She ran her establishment with a firm hand and a keen eye, her saloon acting as the town's conscience and confessional. She was one of the few people Jack trusted. Her network of contacts, the whispers and rumors that passed through her saloon, were more reliable than any telegraph. Before leaving, he had sent a wire to a contact in the capital, asking them to send any information they could find on Silas Crane to Sarah. He found a telegraph office in Jericho and sent a coded message to Cedar Falls. Crane in Jericho. Vengeance for Black Creek. M. Crane's brother. Need information. He knew Sarah would understand. While he waited for a reply, he gathered what he could. He spoke to miners, his questions casual, his demeanor that of a weary traveler. He learned that Silas Crane had passed through 2 days prior. He hadn't come to rob the place. He'd come to do business. He'd met with a mine owner, a ruthless man named Abercrombie, and had purchased a controlling interest in the mine with cash that was undoubtedly from the Cedar Falls Bank. Crane wasn't just building a gang. He was building an empire using legitimate business as a front for his criminal enterprise. His actions were always strangely personal, directed at things he knew Jack would investigate, drawing him deeper into the web. The next evening, a reply came. Jack sat in the telegraph office, the clatter of the machine sounding like a death knell as he decoded the message from Sarah. Information confirmed. Silas Crane, younger brother of Marcus, was a lawyer in St. Louis before disappearing 3 years ago. Highly intelligent, highly dangerous. Jack, be careful. Deputy Evans is riding to meet you. Against my advice. He says a marshal shouldn't be alone. A lawyer. It explained the eloquence, the meticulous planning. Silas wasn't a common thug. He was a fallen man of education and means twisted by hate. And now Evans was riding into the heart of it. The boy's loyalty was going to get him killed. As Jack stepped out of the telegraph office, a figure detached itself from the shadows of the alley across the street. "Marshal Thorne," a smooth voice called out. Jack's hand instinctively went to his Colt. Stepping into the faint light of a nearby lantern was Silas Crane himself. He was smiling, his hands held open in a gesture of peace that was utterly insincere. He was flanked by 2 men, but they kept a respectful distance. I must confess I'm impressed. Silas said, his voice a low, cultured purr. You're every bit as relentless as the stories claim. My men were meant to delay you for a week, not merely a few days. The game is over, Crane. Jack said, his voice a low growl. Over. Silas chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. My dear Marshal, it has only just begun. This is merely the second act. The first was Cedar Falls, a prologue, if you will, a necessary tragedy to set the stage. He took a step closer, his eyes gleaming. Tell me, did Sheriff Miller have a family? I do hope so. It makes the lesson so much more poignant. The casual cruelty of the words sent a surge of hot rage through Jack. He fought to keep his voice steady. What do you want, Silas? And what do I want? He feigned surprise. Why, the same thing you wanted at Black Creek, justice. He savored the word. My brother Marcus was a good man, a family man. You and your posse gunned him down in cold blood. You called him an outlaw, but you were the real criminal, Thorne, the executioner. Your brother was hiding behind a child. Jack said the words like stones in his throat. A convenient lie to justify a murder. Silas countered smoothly. But we needn't debate the finer points of history. The past is prologue, as I said. I am here to write the final chapter. He paused, reaching into his waistcoat. For a heart-stopping moment, Jack thought he was going for the locket. Instead, he produced a faded photograph. He held it out. It was a picture of 2 young boys, arms slung around each other, smiling for the camera. One was clearly a younger Marcus. The other, a boy with intelligent dark eyes, was Silas. We were inseparable. Silas said, his voice taking on a tone of genuine aching sorrow that was more disturbing than his anger. And you took him from me. He tucked the photo away. I am not a common thief, Marshal. I am a purveyor of consequences. Everything I have done, every ranch I've burned, every man I've killed, has been a message to you. I am undoing your legacy piece by piece. I am burning down the world you tried to protect to prove that your brand of justice is a fraud. And Cedar Falls? Jack asked, his voice tight. Ben Miller had nothing to do with Black Creek? No. Silas admitted. He was simply a pawn, as is your town, as is this. He pulled the gold locket from his pocket. It glinted in the lantern light. Jack's breath caught in his chest. Silas snapped it open. Elena. He read the inscription. A beautiful name. She was lovely. He looked up, his eyes boring into Jack's. I am going to burn everything you have ever loved, Thorne. And when you have nothing left but the memory of your failures, you will come to me. And then, and only then, will I grant you the mercy of death. He snapped the locket shut and tossed it lightly in the air, catching it with a flourish before slipping it back into his pocket. Enjoy Jericho, Marshal. The final act will take place back where it all began. I'll be waiting for you in Cedar Falls. With a nod to his men, Silas Crane turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving Jack standing alone in the street, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. This wasn't a chase. It was an invitation. A summons to a final bloody confrontation on a stage of Silas's own choosing. The ride back to Cedar Falls was a grim pilgrimage. The knowledge of Silas's true identity had reframed everything. Every action, every word was now filtered through the lens of a deeply personal vendetta. He was no longer just a marshal hunting an outlaw. He was a man walking toward a reckoning he had unknowingly set in motion years ago. The ghost of Marcus Crane rode with him, its presence a cold weight on his soul. Half a day out from Jericho, he found Deputy Evans. The young man was camped by a small stream, his horse grazing nearby. He jumped to his feet when Jack rode in his face, a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Marshal, I got your wire." "Well, Sarah's wire. I came as fast as I could," Evans said, his words tumbling out. "You shouldn't be out here alone, not after what he did to Sheriff Miller." Jack dismounted, his movements weary. He looked at the boy, and he was just a boy full of righteous fire and a naive belief in a world of clear-cut heroes and villains. "You should have stayed in Cedar Falls, Evans. This isn't your fight." "With all due respect, sir, it is," Evans insisted, his jaw set with determination. "Silas Crane murdered my sheriff. He terrorized my town. That makes it my fight." Jack saw a flicker of the man he used to be in the deputy's eyes. The unwavering belief in the badge and justice. He didn't have the heart to tell him that justice was a far murkier thing than he imagined. "Crane isn't just an outlaw's son. He's the brother of a man I killed years back. This is about revenge. He's baiting me, and he'll kill anyone who gets in his way." "Then all the more reason for me to be here," Evans said simply. "To watch your back." Jack knew he couldn't send him away. The boy had a core of steel that wouldn't be denied. And a part of him admitted he was right. A marshal shouldn't be alone. "All right, Evans. You ride with me. But you listen to every word I say. You do exactly as I command. No arguments. Your first mistake out here will be your last. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Evans said, a look of profound relief on his face. They rode together, the silence between them thick with unspoken questions. As they drew closer to home, the sky began to change. The clear, sharp blue of the high desert grew hazy, a yellowish pallor spreading from the west. The wind picked up, carrying with it a fine, stinging grit. A sandstorm was coming, a big one. They arrived at the outskirts of Cedar Falls to a scene of grim preparation. The town was no longer the peaceful haven Jack had left. Men with rifles stood on rooftops, their faces tense. Crude barricades of wagons and barrels blocked the ends of the main street. Silas Crane had returned just as he'd promised. He hadn't just come back to wait. He had taken the entire town hostage. A figure ran out to meet them, Sarah Mitchell. Her face etched with worry, a shotgun held firmly in her hands. "Jack, thank God. We didn't know if you were alive." "What happened?" Sarah Jack asked, swinging down from his horse. "He came back yesterday," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Rode in with 20 men. Took the town without a shot fired. He's got the whole place locked down. He made an announcement. Said he was waiting for you. Said the town would pay the price for any interference." The main street was eerily quiet, the usual bustle replaced by a tense, waiting silence. Doors were shut, windows shuttered. Crane's men were everywhere, their presence a suffocating blanket of menace. A town crier, the baker Mr. Abernathy, was pushed out into the street by one of Crane's men. He held a piece of paper, his hands trembling. A message. "A message from Mr. Crane for Marshal Thorne," he called out, his voice cracking. He invites you to a final discussion. Sundown, in Sarah's saloon. You are to come alone and unarmed. If you do not, the town will burn before the storm hits." It was the final move in his twisted game. A public showdown, turning the entire community into his battleground, his audience. The wind howled, whipping dust into their faces, a fitting overture for the coming chaos. "You can't go in there," Jack Sarah pleaded. "It's a trap. He'll kill you." "It's the only way," Jack said, his gaze fixed on the saloon at the end of the street. "He wants an audience. He wants to finish this where it began." He looked at Evans, his expression grim. "Stay with Sarah. Help organize the townsfolk. If this goes wrong, get as many people as you can to the storm cellars." "But Marshal—" Evans started to protest. "That's an order," Deputy Jack said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He turned to Sarah. "Keep everyone back. No matter what you hear, stay out of that saloon." He handed his rifle to Evans. and unbuckled his gun belt, letting it drop into the dust. He was walking into the lion's den, just as Silas wanted. As he started the long walk down the empty street, the wind shrieked around him, tearing at his clothes. The sky had turned a sickly, bruised yellow. Dust swirled in thick eddies, obscuring the rooftops, the barricades turning the world into a gritty, suffocating haze. The sun, a weak orange disk, was sinking toward the horizon. Sundown was coming. The final act was about to begin. The saloon doors swung inward, with a protesting groan as Jack pushed them open. The world outside, with its howling wind and stinging dust, was replaced by a strange, sepulchral quiet. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale whiskey and tension. Dust motes danced in the weak beams of light, filtering through the grimy windows, the only illumination coming from a few flickering lanterns that cast long, grotesque shadows on the walls. The sandstorm raged its muffled roar, a constant oppressive presence rattling the windows in their frames. Silas Crane sat at a poker table in the center of the room, a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses before him. He was alone, impeccably dressed, as always a stark, black figure in the gloom. He looked up as Jack entered, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Marshal Thorne," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Punctual as ever. A professional to the end. Please have a seat. Join me in a final drink." Jack's eyes scanned the room. The shadows were deep, concealing. He knew Silas wasn't truly alone. "Where are they, Crane?" My associates positioned for an optimal view of the proceedings. Silas gestured vaguely toward the darkened corners and the balcony above. "They have their instructions. This is between you and me. A private conversation before a public execution." Behind the bar, a figure moved. Mr. Harris, the banker, his face ashen, his hands bound in front of him. A gag was tied loosely around his neck. One of Silas's men stood behind him, a knife held casually to his throat. The hostage. The moral choice. "He stole from you, Marshal," Silas said conversationally, following Jack's gaze. "A little creative accounting with the town's funds. I uncovered it during my brief tenure as the bank's new owner. I thought it only fitting he be present for the restoration of justice." Jack walked slowly toward the table, his footsteps echoing on the dusty floorboards. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, each second a hammer blow, counting down to a final verdict. He stopped opposite Silas, but he didn't sit. "This isn't about justice, Silas. This is about a lie you've told yourself for years." Silas poured 2 glasses of whiskey, his movements deliberate. "A lie, no. It is a truth you have spent years running from. The truth that you are a murderer." He pushed a glass across the table. "My brother was a good man. Your brother was a corrupt lawman." Jack said the words finally spoken aloud after years of silence. Marcus was on the payroll of the Sterling Cattle Company. He was selling them information, tipping them off about pauses, about where to strike next. He was a traitor to the badge he wore. Silas's smile tightened, the first crack in his polished facade. "Lies. Desperate slanders to cover your own guilt. It's the truth." Jack pressed his voice low and intense. The Black Creek incident wasn't about rustlers. It was about stopping Marcus before he sold out the entire valley. He was going to lead the Sterling's gunmen to a settlement of homesteaders' families they wanted run off the land. He was trading their lives for a bag of silver. Jack's own guilt felt like a stone in his gut, but the truth had to be told. When we cornered him, he took that boy hostage. He was going to kill him, Silas. I took the only shot I had. Silas stared at him, his knuckles white where he gripped his glass. For a moment, a flicker of doubt, of confusion crossed his features. The carefully constructed narrative of his life, the one that fueled his quest for revenge, was being dismantled before his eyes. "You're lying." He whispered the words ragged. "Am I?" Jack said. Ask yourself, where did Marcus get the money for that fine horse, that new ranch on a deputy's salary? You're an intelligent man, Silas. You were a lawyer. Look at the facts, not the story you wanted to believe. Silas's face contorted the grief and rage he had nurtured for so long, warring with the cold, unwelcome light of reason. The foundation of his entire existence was cracking. Even if it were true, he began, his voice shaking with fury, he was my brother, my blood, and you left him to die in the mud. He suddenly swept the bottle and glasses from the table. They shattered on the floor. It doesn't matter, he roared, leaping to his feet. You took him from me. You will pay. He lunged not at Jack, but at the hostage, pulling a hidden derringer and pressing it to the banker's head. Now you will die, and the town will watch its hero fail. The shot came from the saloon's swinging doors. The bullet struck the gunman holding the knife to Harris, sending him staggering back. Deputy Evans stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, his young face pale but determined. It's over, Crane. The distraction was all Jack needed. He vaulted over the table, tackling Silas. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs. Silas was wiry and surprisingly strong, fighting with a desperate, cornered animal ferocity. He brought the derringer around, trying to aim it at Jack's head. From the bar, a bottle flew through the air, thrown by Sarah Mitchell, who had slipped in behind Evans. It struck Silas's hand, sending the derringer skittering across the floor. Harris scrambled away to safety. Up on the balcony, Silas's other men opened fire. Evans returned fire, providing covering shots, while Jack and Silas wrestled on the floor. The saloon erupted into a chaotic symphony of splintering wood, shattering glass, and echoing gunshots. Jack landed a solid punch on Silas's jaw, dazing him. He scrambled for the derringer, but Silas was faster, kicking it away. Silas drew a long, thin knife from his boot, the blade gleaming in the lantern light. He slashed wildly, forcing Jack back. I will have my vengeance. Silas screamed, his eyes wild, his elegant composure completely gone, replaced by raw, unhinged grief. Jack backed away, grabbing a chair to fend off the knife thrusts. He wasn't a killer anymore. He wouldn't become the man he was at Black Creek, not again. He had to end this, but not with another death on his conscience. Silas lunged, and Jack threw the chair, knocking him off balance. In that instant, Jack closed the distance, not with a weapon, but with his bare hands. He grabbed Silas's wrist, twisting it until he cried out in pain, and the knife clattered to the floor. Jack slammed him against the bar, his forearm pressed against Silas's throat. They stood there, chest to chest, their ragged breaths mingling. The shooting had stopped. Evans had either hit his targets or driven them off. In the sudden silence, broken only by the howl of the storm and the ticking of the clock, Jack looked into Silas Crane's eyes. He didn't see a monster. He saw a broken man, a boy who had lost his brother and built a fortress of hate around his grief. It's over. Jack said, his voice quiet but firm. He didn't kill him. He didn't even hit him again. He simply held him there until the fight drained out of him, until Silas Crane, the architect of ruin, finally collapsed, sobbing, a man defeated not by a bullet, but by the weight of a terrible, unbearable truth. The sandstorm abated with the dawn, leaving behind a world scoured clean and unnaturally quiet. The air was cool and crisp, the sky a pale, washed-out blue. In the aftermath of the showdown, Cedar Falls slowly came back to life. Townsfolk emerged from their homes and cellars, in their faces a mixture of exhaustion and tentative relief. Silas Crane and the remainder of his men were locked in the very jail they had intended to use as a fortress. Their reign of terror brought to an end, not by an army, but by the courage of a few determined people. Jack stood outside the saloon as the sun rose, the gold locket resting in the palm of his hand. Deputy Evans had found it on Silas during the chaos and returned it without a word. It felt heavier now, freighted with the weight of the night's events. Evans approached him, his movements stiff. He'd taken a piece of shrapnel in his arm, but had waved off any help until the town was secure. Marshal, he said the title now, carrying a new weight of respect. What happens now? Jack looked at the young man, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes, but also a newfound confidence. He had faced his first real test and had not faltered. Now, Jack said, you do your job, deputy. You take statements. You wire the territorial capital and inform them we have prisoners for them. You help this town get back on its feet. He reached up and unpinned the star from his vest. He held it out to Evans. But you'll do it as sheriff. Evans stared at the star, his eyes wide. Sir, I can't. I'm not ready. Ben Miller thought you were, Jack said quietly. And after last night, so do I. This town needs a lawman, a real one, not a ghost from the past. He pressed the star into Evans' hand. They need you. The young man looked from the star to Jack, his expression a mixture of awe and profound gratitude. He nodded, his jaw set. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. Jack clapped him on the shoulder, a rare gesture of affection. I know you won't. He shared a quiet look with Sarah, who was directing a cleanup of her saloon. No words were needed. They had both faced the darkness and survived. The bond between them and the town was now forged in something stronger than shared history. It was forged in shared survival. Later that day, Jack made his way to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the town. The storm had swept the grounds clean, leaving the humble wooden crosses and few stone markers standing stark against the sky. He walked to the grave at the far edge, the one marked with a simple, hand-carved stone. Elena Thorne, beloved wife. He stood there for a long time, the silence of the prairie his only companion. The locket felt warm in his hand. For 2 years it had been his anchor to the past, a symbol of his grief and his guilt. It was the reason he had taken up the badge again and the catalyst for this entire bloody affair. He had thought that getting it back would fix something inside him, would fill the hollow space Elena had left behind. But holding it now, he realized that wasn't true. The locket was just a thing, a piece of gold and paint. The love, the memory of Elena, was not contained within it. It was within him, and by clinging to the object, he had allowed it to become a symbol not of love, but of vengeance and loss. He knelt down in the soft earth. With a gentle hand, he brushed the dust from her name on the headstone. He opened the locket one last time and looked at the tiny, perfect portrait of his wife's smiling face. He remembered her laughter, the warmth of her hand in his, the life they were supposed to have. He wasn't letting go of her. He was letting go of the pain that had defined him since she'd been gone. He was letting go of the ghost of Black Creek. With a final quiet breath, he placed the locket gently on the stone, letting it rest against her name. He didn't tuck it away in his pocket. He left it there glinting in the afternoon sun, a small offering to a past he was finally ready to release. He stood up feeling a lightness he hadn't known in years. He was no longer Marshal Thorne, the haunted lawman, nor Jack Thorne, the blacksmith, hiding from his memories. He was just Jack, a man who had faced his past and chosen to walk toward a future uncertain, though it may be. He turned his back on the grave and walked away from the cemetery, his steps steady, his gaze fixed on the wide, open horizon. He was a free man.